Everything you're about to hear is for education and entertainment purposes only. Whilst we are licensed, we're not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Any advice is general advice. Equity Mates operates under Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.
Equity Mates!
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Welcome back to Uncovered by Equity Mates, a podcast where we shine a light on small and mid-cap companies that don't get the same level of analyst and media attention. My name is Bryce, and to talk through today's company, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this interview. We are uncovering a company that I hadn't heard of before, as is our habit with with this series. We're talking about Sparc Technologies. The ASX ticker is SPN. We're about to speak to Sparc's managing director, Nick O'Loughlin. And Sparc is another company in this series that has worked with Australian universities and is trying to commercialise technology out of Australian universities.
University of Adelaide is where the story for Sparc started, and we'll get into it in today's interview. But there's something in the water in Aussie universities, that's for sure.
Yeah. Highly educated people being aggregated together with resources and time.
Love it.
No, it is exciting. And, obviously, if some of these companies can be successful and then that gives a financial return to the universities, that then gives them the capacity to invest more in this research, and hopefully you start to see a virtuous cycle, and I guess similar to a virtual cycle that we've seen in other parts of the world, i.e. Stanford University in the United States. But anyway, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves because that's a few steps down the line. Right now, what we're talking about is Sparc Technology, which is a company that has sort of three different businesses. They have a steel coating business, they're working on green hydrogen, and they're working on sodium-ion batteries. Now, we want to understand, I guess, all three of these businesses separately, but also what is the through line between them and what gives Sparc a comparative advantage between them all. So there's a lot to cover, a lot of interesting intersections with, the decarbonisation push and renewables. So it'll be an interesting conversation.
Really enjoy the opportunity to speak to the leaders of these companies. And a big thank you to Sparc as well for sponsoring this episode and supporting Equity Mates. It allows us to keep creating content for free. So let's crack in.
Uncovered.
Well, Nick, a massive welcome to Equity Mates.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we want to start with a bit of an introduction to Sparc Technologies and a bit of an introduction to yourself as well. So if you can introduce us to your background and share your journey to Sparc Technologies, and that would be great.
My background is actually in finance and particularly in investment banking. So I was a decade in banking, primarily for the resources sector. So I worked in Australia and London for large resources companies on behalf of global investment banks. And then towards the end of my career in banking, started to get more exposure to the transition or the energy transition for the mining sector in terms of transitioning to renewables, which I found really interesting. And did some more work on that, in the back end of my time in banking, which flowed through to some consulting when I made my way back from the UK to Australia with Rio Tinto on some renewable energy projects for their assets. And then came across Sparc, and I'm a local of Adelaide. Sparc's a local company, and at the time, they just struck a deal to take some really unique novel hydrogen technology out of the University of Adelaide, which really piqued my interest. Started with Sparc looking after that hydrogen project and worked over the past couple of years in that role. And then as of January this year, had the opportunity and gladly stepped up to managing director. So now I look after the whole business. So yeah, that's a quick summary.
Nice.
Love it. And we love the fact that there are these companies taking what's coming out of Australian universities and trying to commercialise it. That's going to be good for the university ecosystem in Australia as a whole. So we want to talk a bit more about that. But I think before we do, it's probably worth just establishing what Sparc looks like today, because there's three different technologies or 3 different businesses, hydrogen that you mentioned, but also steel coatings and batteries. So I guess give us an overview of the Sparc portfolio.
Yeah, sure, Alex. So, you mentioned the 3 pillars that we have in our technology portfolio. They're all renewable and sustainability linked, so there is a link between them, and they are all derived from or in partnership with the university sector, which we'll come back to, but I think it's a really important point. So to start with the hydrogen technology, we're working on a novel way of producing hydrogen, which is based on photocatalysis as opposed to electrolysis. So maybe for a bit of a 101 for your listeners, a lot of people would have heard of green hydrogen, and green hydrogen, as it's reported in the media, is basically using electricity from green sources, so from solar PV and wind, to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. Which has been around for about 100 years, electrolysis. It's a well-known technology in that way, but it certainly hasn't been scaled as a way to produce large-scale green hydrogen, and it still hasn't yet today, despite the variety of projects that are touted. So photocatalysis is completely different. It uses a photocatalyst material to split water. It doesn't use electricity or an electrolyzer. So these photocatalyst materials are highly specialised and highly engineered materials. And basically, when you leave one of these materials out in sunlight with water on top, the water will split automatically, and the sunlight is catalysing that reaction. So it's a really novel tech, really quite unique. And Sparc Hydrogen, which is the joint venture that is between ourselves, Fortescue and the University of Adelaide, is really targeting commercialising photocatalysis as a way to produce green hydrogen at scale. So really interesting and exciting, and that was my initial entree into the business. As I said, I was looking after that project solely really for the past couple of years. And building on that in terms of the rest of the portfolio, and actually the foundation of the company was on the back of graphene technology out of the University of Adelaide again. And that was about 5 years ago when the company was founded on the back of that graphene tech. We since focused quite heavily into a graphene-based additive for anti-corrosive coatings. So you mentioned steel. These coatings go on steel, like the Sydney Harbour Bridge, to protect it from rust effectively. So what we've developed in this graphene-based additive, which we call EcoSparc, is basically a drop-in additive into an existing paint formulation, which improves its anti-corrosive performance. So basically you'll get a longer life out of that paint. It protects the steel for longer. You need to do less maintenance. So that's a really exciting prospect. That's our most mature technology, and we're really close to commercialisation for that particular product, which is called EcoSparc. But that's off the back of over 5 years of research and development and technology development with our graphene-based additives. So that's our second leg of the business. And thirdly, and it was an adjunct or a bit of a side play on our work in graphene, was looking at hard carbon materials, which are basically a different form of graphene, put simply. So graphene is a single layer of carbon atoms. Hard carbon is a disordered structure of carbon atoms. Now, these hard carbon materials are currently used as the anodes in sodium-ion batteries. So whereas in a lithium-ion battery, you use graphite, and a lot of your listeners will be familiar with that, sodium-ion batteries use hard carbon materials. So in this particular project, which we've been doing with Queensland University of Technology, we're looking at developing anode materials out of an agricultural biowaste. So it's a really circular, sustainable angle there, taking a waste product from the agricultural sector and processing that through to a hard carbon material, which you can then use in a sodium-ion battery. Again, really strong sustainability link and green link with those batteries. So again, that's an exciting technology. It's earlier stage than our hydrogen or our graphene-based additives, but I think it's one to watch, particularly with the growing adoption of sodium-ion batteries we're seeing, or commercialisation in particular we're seeing across the globe.
So Nick, as a potential investor and, for a lot of the Equity Mates community listening, other than, the broad sustainability connection between the three businesses, they seem rather distinct to each other. Is there are there any other like common factors or relationships or core expertise that link them together? How should we be thinking about the overall business and I guess understanding where it's going to go?
All of our technologies are either derived from or in partnership with the university sector in Australia. All of them have a strong renewable and sustainability link, which will continue to be the case with any new technologies that we look at in the future. So that's really important for us. But, the fact, of the matter is, for us, we're really focusing on fairly unique technology areas. We don't see anyone else, certainly in the Australian space, playing in sodium-ion batteries. Our green hydrogen technology is certainly unique globally in terms of what we're doing there. We believe we're a leader in photocatalysis globally. And then again, our work in graphene-based additives, which has been a significant body of work over 5 years, we believe is leading into that particular market, being the anti-corrosive paint market. So the linkage between the different legs of the business was started in graphene from the University of Adelaide. That presented an opportunity to get into the green hydrogen project alongside Fortescue. And then subsequent to that, the work in graphene led to the work in sodium-ion batteries as well. So they've all kind of stemmed from each other, but they've branched out and they're certainly distinct in terms of the industries that we're playing in. But the way to look at the business going forward is we're certainly comfortable with the portfolio we've built for a small company, and that's certainly enough to manage as we stand today. We do look at other opportunities in that space. We're always speaking to universities and their commercialisation teams about what is going on in the sector, and we can come back to that a bit later. But at the moment, we're certainly happy with the portfolio. Anything that we added would probably be once we've had some success for commercialisation, which is probably most likely in the near term on the graphene-based additives.
Before we get to commercialisation, let's talk about the university side of it, because we've mentioned it a few times so far. So as we've covered, all three products are either out of a university or being built in conjunction with a university. How does a company like Sparc actually partner with universities? And when there is some hot research project or some hot IP, how do you actually go about securing the license to commercialise it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Alec, and we certainly feel like we've got a niche in working with the university sector. We're not alone in that regard throughout Australia, but certainly we've worked alongside universities for a long time, and there is a bit of getting used to, I guess, in terms of the way to work with the university sector. So we're really well placed there. I think what I'd say, to your question is that there are different models that you can use, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So for Sparc Hydrogen, which is where we're developing our photocatalysis technology, all of the research is conducted at the university. Sparc Hydrogen has a research agreement, so we effectively fund the university over a period of time to do the work, and we set out the milestones and we monitor that and work with the research team very closely. So, we've got a team of about 7 there full-time working on Sparc Hydrogen effectively. So that is a very much a standalone product, standalone lab, within the university. It's led by Professor Greg Meether, and he spends the vast majority of his time now on Sparc Hydrogen. Now, that is somewhat unique in the university space. It requires a very senior member of the research community being, Greg. He was a former head of chemistry at the university. He's been there for, I think, over 25 years. So he is able to dedicate a lot of his time to our project. That's not always the case, certainly with younger researchers. So that's one model where you basically develop a team in-house at the university, and then you fund that through the commercial partners, being ourselves and Fortescue in that case. The other model, and probably a more common model, is project by project type work. So QUT is a little bit in that mold. You effectively have a services agreement with the university. Once you've identified the researchers you'd like to work with, you identified the tech that they're developing, and then you fund that for a period of time directly over, it might be 12 months, let's say, and then often you try and get grant funding off the back of that initial investment, etc., to kind of leverage your funds. And they're shorter term projects. There's also CRCs, collaborative research or cooperative research, sort of collaborations between larger groups of companies and universities. They're typically longer dated projects, 3 to 5 years, and frankly less suited to small companies like Sparc. If you're a big company like a BHP, you can fund that type of research and you don't need the output as quickly as certainly we do as a smaller company. So that's not the model that we choose to go down, but that's also a very popular model to work with universities from the commercial side.
So currently all the 3 products are pre-revenue. So can you tell us about the journey or the process that you need to go through, taking something that works in a uni lab and in a testing environment and then turning it into a commercially viable product? And
I might start on the graphene-based additives because I think this is a good example where the original IP was identified. It was in the University of Adelaide. They took shares in the company and vended in some of that IP. So initially, when the company was at its very early stages, the work was conducted at the university. Shortly thereafter, the company built its own presence and its own facilities. So I'm sitting here in Kent Town in Adelaide. We have a fully functioning paint laboratory here. We do all of our testing with our graphene-based additives for anti-corrosive paints in-house. So we've set up all the equipment. The people are all staff of Sparc Technologies. And effectively, we've extracted the original IP out of the university and taken that forward very much in-house. So that's one model, and that certainly provides a lot of flexibility for the company to run the projects and its staffing, etc. Another model, as I mentioned with Sparc Hydrogen, is conducting the research at the university, and you fund that particular research team. In terms of the actual stages of technology development, I often like to point people to technology readiness level. It's not maybe widely known in the broader investing community in Australia. It's probably more familiar in maybe a more mature technology market like the US. But basically, we're trying to build value in the technology in the early stages. So you're trying to de-risk it. And once you start with a concept or an idea, that's at the very early stages of the technology readiness level. Then you try and test in the lab, then prototype it, then pilot it. And throughout all these phases, you're moving up the technology readiness level. And that's what we're trying to do in each of our verticals. And obviously, commercialization discussions start happening when you're at that, prototyping or piloting phase where you've got a real view to, okay, over the next, might be 2 years, 3 years, whatever, we can, effectively take this into the real world and make a commercial product out of it, or license the technology, whatever the case may be. So it's a staged approach. You manage your risks throughout those stages. You spend less money at the earlier stages and more money as you scale up and as you move up that technology readiness level. And one analogy I like to make with the Australian investing community, which is very familiar in resources, and again, that's my background as well. I'm very familiar in that space. If you're if you're an explorer, you're not putting in one drill hole. You're putting in a variety of drill holes, and you may have a variety of different projects as well to manage your risk. Once you're able to prove up the resources and commence development on a project, again, you stage your investment and take it through feasibility to get it to a point where you can make a CapEx decision and then hopefully produce revenue. Not that dissimilar in a technology sense. You're trying to de-risk all the way through, and then once you've created the value in the tech, you're able to have options then as to how you want to commercialise it. You could produce the product yourself, you could license it out, you could sell the IP or bring in partners. So you've then sort of got options once you've developed the value in the tech. So sorry, a long-winded answer, but
no, makes sense.
It's interesting, and I'd actually never heard of that technology readiness level scale. So I just Googled that as well. Interesting stuff. You always learn more when we're speaking to these companies. that we haven't heard a lot about. So that's why we love doing it. Let's go business by business, because, you know, at the end of the day, this is an investing podcast and we want to see revenue coming in the door. That's the name of the game. I mean, you've got a finance background. I'm sure you're itching to get there as well, and start proving some of these technologies to the investing community. So let's go business by business, hear where they're up to in their commercialization journey. What are some of the milestones you're hoping to reach in the near future? And because it is the oldest business, let's start with the graphene-based additives. So you've got your paint facility that you're talking from today. You've got the additive that can be added to existing paint manufacturing processes. So how's that going? How are the conversations going, and what's next?
Yeah, no, that's a good place to start because it's our most mature technology, as I mentioned earlier. And it's been, I think it's fair enough to say, it's been a long road, a long journey to bring this graphene-based additive and this product based called EcoSparc, you know, approaching to the point where we are now, where we're really close to commercialization. So a few points I'd make just around the graphene-based additive and graphene more broadly. Graphene is known as a super material. You know, it has all these wonderful properties of strength, flexibility, you know, electrostatic properties, antimicrobial, all of these things that people identified after the material was discovered about 20 years ago and said, well, let's put graphene in everything and it's going to make all of our products better. Effectively, we went through this hype phase. A lot of people put money in, tried it, didn't work. And the heat and the air, you know, completely came out of the graphene market. Sparc started investing in graphene probably on the back of that when confidence and sentiment around graphene was sort of at its lowest ebb. And what the company did was say, okay, we're not going to be a graphene producer, and we're still not a graphene producer. We're going to work with graphene and the right type of graphene, most importantly, and we're going to put that graphene into a product, and we're going to build a team that are experts in that particular industry. So in our case, we've built a team of experts, of coatings experts. So people from the paint business, basically. And we have, I think it's over 120 years of experience of paint company expertise in-house at Sparc. And that has guided the development of the product. We've paired that with guys in the lab and scientists who've been working with graphene for many, many years now. So experts in working with and handling graphene. So what we've developed, and the real important part about this additive, is that we've sorted through dozens and dozens of different types of graphene. Graphene is not a commodity. People will call it graphene. It could be just black stuff. So it takes a lot of time to actually sort through the different suppliers of graphene, identify what properties you're really targeting for our product being EcoSparc into anti-corrosive paint. So we've done all that work. We've identified a handful of sources that work in our product, and that's really important. That took a lot of time to do. Beyond that, and in the paint business, particularly in anti-corrosive paints, you need to test anti-corrosive paints in the lab over what we do is a 6-month cyclic test. And this is standard in the industry. You put it through really harsh conditions which replicate a North Sea environment. So the oil rigs up in Scotland. And it represents 25 years of intensive corrosion over a 6-month period. So the other thing about the paint business is the testing is intense and it takes time. We've done 6 rounds of 6-month testing. So we've done a lot of testing, more than anyone else, we believe, who's working with a graphene-based additive in the paint business. So we have a significant body of data behind us. We've proven that, and we've gotten in the door with a few of the largest paint companies in the world, so the global manufacturers, and we're working with smaller companies as well. So that's a big tick in the box, and we've been doing that work over an extended period of time now.
What did the testing show? Or the 6 months, 6 rounds of 6 months, yeah.
The testing's showing really strong consistency in improvement in anti-corrosive performance. So one of the key tests that you do for anti-corrosion is you take a piece of steel that's coated, you put a scribe in it, you effectively damage the paint, and then you put it in the cyclic testing and you watch how the rust spreads. So if you're able to limit the spread of that rust, it's better. So we've shown over those 6 rounds of testing that we can limit the spread of rust by anywhere up to 70%, our results are pretty consistent in around certainly in the 20 to 40% range. So that's significant. That's a significant improvement in what is paint formulations that haven't changed in 20 years. So we're really trying to disrupt the industry in that respect. The other key testing that we've shown is that we make the coating more flexible. So corrosion only starts when a paint cracks. If you can make paint harder to crack and more flexible, then that's a good thing. So you're going to have less corrosion on a steel asset. So we've also done that, and we're actually in the process of quantifying that. We're having to kind of rework the standards a little bit to quantify that test, and we're hoping to actually say a bit more about that towards the middle of the year. But that will add to our scribe creep data and show kind of the end-to-end improvement in corrosion that we're able to show. And then for asset owners, it's really important because it's increasing the time between maintenance events. And coating an asset, the cost is not actually in the paint. About, let's say, 5% of the cost is in the paint. 95% is in the scaffolding, in the blasting, in the shrouding, all of the stuff that goes around the maintenance event. So you see someone on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, on scaffolding pretty much all year round. They're painting, to protect against corrosion.
I think they start at one end and go to the other, and then when they get to the other end, they turn around and just come back. That's how they're just constantly painting that thing.
Well, that's exactly right. And
Seriously.
I'd love, and we're currently in trials, which I'll come to. I'd love to do a trial on the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
Yeah, that would be good.
So, Nick, how big is the market for something like this? Like you'd be looking at this and saying, how big can this get?
So, the anti-corrosive, so marine and protected coatings, which is the broader paint segment that we're targeting with EcoSparc at this stage, not to say we're limited to that, but that's where our data lies, is more than over a $40 billion market, per annum. This additive is a drop-in additive, which you add at the point of paint manufacture. It doesn't change the way paint's made, doesn't change the way paint's applied or removed. And in that way, it's very easily adopted by the industry. So what we've done with our recent trials that we announced with the SA government is we've effectively partnered with a large, tier one paint manufacturer. They've made a batch of paint for us, dropped in the additive. We've bought the paint off them, and then we're supplying it, in this case, to the Department of Infrastructure here in South Australia to go on a large jetty at Streaky Bay and a bridge here in Adelaide called West Beach Bridge. So those trials will start taking place next quarter two, so in our current quarter, and they'll run for a period of time. Importantly, the data that we get from those trials, or the important data, is really over the first 6 to 9 months. So we're not having to wait for years and years to get data out of these trials. We're putting the paint on the asset, which is enhanced with EcoSparc. Alongside that, we're putting the unenhanced paint. So we're able to directly compare. And the important data that we'll get from that is that the paint doesn't fall off, over which is pretty important. And paint, in terms of a catastrophic failure, it'll fail early on. So in the first 6 months is fairly well considered in the industry. And then secondly, that the paint applies in exactly the same way that the original paint does. So we're very confident that because we've been applying the EcoSparc enhanced paint for a number of years now, but there's nothing like showing it in the real world. So they're two really important bits of data we'll get. We're looking to replicate those trials across the key industry segments that we're targeting for this paint. So we've ticked off government now. We're looking at oil and gas, mining, and defence. And we've got trials bubbling away in each of those streams, and hopefully that builds our news flow in the next sort of 3 months or so with some of those trials being announced.
Nice. Well, there's a bunch of follow-up questions, and we could go deep on the paint industry, but unfortunately we don't have the time because you've got 2 other technologies that we want to cover off. The next one is green hydrogen. Now, that's probably the one that you're most intimately familiar with, given that's where you started with Sparc, and it's an impressive lineup of names behind the technology. Fortescue Future Industries, the University of Adelaide, and testing with the CSIRO. You've just completed a trial with the CSIRO. What were the results, if you can share them, and I guess where to next for this technology? Yeah,
no, really timely, because we did release an announcement this morning about the prototyping that we've conducted, or the second round of prototyping that we've conducted at the CSIRO. So that testing is effectively prototype testing. So we're testing a photocatalytic water splitting receiver or reactor, bit of a mouthful, but we're testing that reactor up in real world conditions at the CSIRO Energy Centre in Newcastle. So that facility is effectively a mirror field. And if you look at our announcements, you'll see how that mirror field looks. It's a variety of mirror panels, and they shine up onto a central tower. So you can generate a lot of concentration of sunlight at that facility. Just a step back, the unique thing we're doing around photocatalytic water splitting is that we're combining that technology with concentrated solar. As I mentioned before, photocatalysis involves sunlight on a photocatalyst material with water in contact, and you'll split water and you'll see the bubbling occurring. And I've got an interesting video on this that I could point people to. What we're doing is we're increasing the amount of sunlight onto that material. So we're effectively concentrating the sunlight using mirrors, and that allows us to split more water for a given area of photocatalyst, which is important because these photocatalysts are, highly engineered materials, and if you can use less, then that's positive. It also generates temperature or higher temperatures, and those temperatures have shown to be really positive for the rates at which you split water using this particular technique. And as importantly, it allows us to incorporate photocatalysis into an existing solar field. So these mirror fields are already used in industry. They're used to produce heat, they're used to produce power, and we're able to buy those mirror fields off the shelf, which is what we're looking to do with our piloting, which is the next stage of scale up. Buy it off the shelf, basically retrofit it with our photocatalytic water splitting receiver, and then scale it from there. So one of the things that hard tech often runs up against is that you're working on the technology, you also need to work on scaling up the infrastructure. In this case, the infrastructure is already scaled, and we're not worried about that. We can take off the shelf mirror systems, and then they're already modular, and then we can basically bolt them together. So once we prove the tech at scale, in a pilot, it's pretty, I don't want to underplay it, but it's relatively straightforward to modularize it and then bolt it together and make a bigger system that's, a commercial system per se.
I guess the question becomes, if you are able to prove this technology out and I guess retrofit it to existing solar fields that are already there, how do you expect the cost of photocatalytic hydrogen to compare to electrolysis hydrogen?
Yep, and this is the key question, right? And this is very topical. So, and I don't want to cast light on the electrolysis industry. It's important for us that electrolysis gets up and that projects are developed and a green hydrogen industry develops, here in Australia, along with around the world. But the fact is, the cost of electrolysis is largely driven by the cost of renewable energy. So solar PV, wind and batteries in sort of a system there going into an electrolyser. The cost of renewable energy, is not coming down fast. They're mature technologies now. There's fairly limited growth and it's incremental growth in terms of getting those costs down. So I'm fairly confident in saying, and based on what I know of these projects, which are coming through feasibility now in terms of their costs, they're a fair way away from what the industry needs and the industry and governments, et cetera, are targeting in terms of making green hydrogen really commercial. And that's why some of these government programs are focused on getting the early projects up and going and subsidising them in that way. But there's going to be a significant period of time from where we sit today until where green hydrogen by electrolysis really makes sense from a commercial perspective. I'm as confident as I am in anything to say that, it's going to be a decade or more. So there's a window of opportunity for new tech to come through. And photocatalysis is certainly a new and novel tech. The key thing around commercialising photocatalysis is getting the efficiencies of splitting water to a requisite level. And the metric we use and the industry uses is called the solar to hydrogen efficiency. Now, the theoretical limit for solar to hydrogen efficiency using photocatalysis is about 30%. It's actually similar to the efficiency of a solar panel in converting sunlight energy into electrical energy. So 30% is the limit. To date, photocatalysis has been in the low single digits. We did some techno-economic analysis not too long ago. We believe at 5% solar to hydrogen, photocatalysis starts looking interesting. particularly if you can have a dual revenue and a dual product being the heat that you generate. And that heat is used in a variety of different industries. So you can sell that product. So if you're able to sell the heat and the hydrogen at 5%, it looks really interesting. Certainly at 10%, that's the benchmark, that's the target that we have as a company to reach. And that's where it really makes commercial sense to scale this tech and proliferate it, hopefully, throughout the world in high solar regions. Just to make a comment on how we get there in terms of the solar hydrogen efficiency, it's driven by pairing world-leading photocatalyst materials with a world-leading reactor. We certainly feel like we've got or are developing a world-leading reactor. And the photocatalyst materials, we effectively partner with those providers of those materials. And what we're seeing is step changes in the efficiency of those materials. We saw a material relatively recently which reported, albeit at a research level, double digits in terms of the salt and the hydrogen of splitting water using that material. So that gives us a lot of confidence that there's a lot of development ongoing in photocatalyst materials. We're developing a reactor and we're ultimately looking to pair the two together and produce a really low-cost system for producing hydrogen where you don't need an electrolyzer, you don't need the high-voltage transmission, and you've basically got a scalable mirror system in which to build large-scale projects.
So, Nick, then the final pillar of the business at the moment is the sodium-ion batteries. A number of big players in the industry or in this space at the moment, global players. So, where are you up to in the path to market with sodium-ion batteries?
Yeah, look, and this is an earlier stage technology. And as I said at the top, we're looking to develop an anode material. So we're not looking to be a battery developer. That's a minefield for small companies. It's very expensive and it's very long periods of time for the technology development. So we're focused on a relatively novel process to produce these hard carbon materials from the agricultural bio-waste. We're still doing that at the lab stage. Ultimately, we're looking to partner with someone in the sodium-ion battery or the broader battery industry to take the tech forward once we've generated the data and assuming the data continues to stack up. So that's the approach we'll take to commercialisation there, is to bring someone in the battery industry in. I'm not sort of naive enough to suggest Sparc Technologies could do that ourselves. And then more broadly on the industry, really exciting developments with BYD, CATL being the two largest battery manufacturers in the world, entering into sodium-ion batteries. Northvolt, probably the largest, best-known private battery manufacturer, also announced commercialisation of sodium-ion batteries in November last year. And there's growing momentum behind sodium-ion because it uses much lower cost materials than lithium-ion batteries. And because those batteries are inherently much, much safer than lithium-ion batteries. They don't catch fire, they don't explode in the same way that lithium-ion batteries do. So there's two key pillars behind the interest there in sodium-ion.
So 3 fascinating areas of technology, and they all have exciting potential use cases. But I guess the biggest risk when you look at a company like Sparc is because they're all pre-revenue, the focus becomes the balance sheet and how you and the team manage the money that you do have, and effectively raise from investors when you need to, so you don't run out of money before you can start generating revenue from these technologies. So at last report, we saw that Sparc had about just shy of $2.5 million in cash on the balance sheet, including an R&D rebate announced in January. So how do you think about managing that cash and, I guess, not running out of running out of money before you can commercialize these technologies? So
as you said, I think we had around 2.3, adding on the R&D rebate that we got back in January. Our burn rate is about $1 million a quarter. We're pretty tight in what we actually spend. And the good thing is, and the really helpful thing that we benefit from a government perspective, is we get R&D tax rebates on the majority of our spend. So we got $1.4 million in January of this year. That represented, a significant portion of what we spent in terms of what was eligible for the rebate, and we can get 48.5 cents back on the dollar there. So all told, our net spend, more or less in a BAU sense, is about $2.5 million per annum. Again, that's pretty light on for a business like ourselves, but that's on purpose because we know that we have to put runs on the board with our own shareholders so that they want to commit, when we do come to market for the next raise. So very cognizant of spending shareholder money and making sure that we're applying those funds to the most attractive technologies, and the most attractive areas to generate value and increase the value of those technologies, and ultimately get runs on the board with commercialising. In the first instance, I think our graphene-based additive being EcoSparc, and then the photocatalytic water splitting and the sodium-ion batteries are longer plays, but they have huge potential and a lot of blue sky. And I think a lot of our investors really value what we're doing in those technology areas.
So Nick, to close out, when you're thinking long-term about Sparc and where it can go, if you think to sort of the 10-year point in time, what does success look like to you?
So 10 years, I guess that's a long period to cast your mind forward to. But certainly by then, to be successful, we would have commercialised, our graphene-based additive being EcoSparc. We would have hopefully expanded our graphene-based additive portfolio beyond EcoSparc. So we're looking at other areas in the paint industry like anti-fouling. We're also looking at other areas like composites where you can incorporate a graphene-based additive. So what we believe we've developed with EcoSparc is a platform, and we're now looking, as we speak, to sort of expand and leverage that platform into other industries. Hopefully industries that are a bit quicker to move than the paint industry as well, I should say. So certainly would have commercialised there, and the model for commercialisation there can vary, but certainly it is a globally relevant platform in terms of manufacturing the additive for the paint industry. So we would be a global business in that sense. On the photocatalytic water splitting, again, building value in the tech, demonstrating that it works and demonstrating that it can be scaled. We would have done that. If you're able to do that and prove you can produce low-cost green hydrogen, the sky's the limit. The interest that we would receive from Australia from overseas would be really significant, because I don't believe, and I don't think many of your listeners believe, that decarbonisation is going anywhere. It's a must, and there's very limited options for some of the industries where hydrogen is targeted. Aside from that, hydrogen is just a massive industry already. It's a 95 million tonne per annum industry, 2.5% of global emissions. It needs to be decarbonised. So we need to find a way to do that in a low-cost way. So we would have commercialised our photocatalytic water splitting reactor, and then in sodium-ion batteries, who knows? Again, don't think we're going to be the one to take that all the way through to commercialisation. We would certainly look at a partnering model there. But once we've established a track record, brought in revenue from our existing portfolio, I think you get the investor, credit for doing that. You build the value in the company, and then you can diversify and look at other areas. So 10 years, we're $1 billion company we're experts in taking technologies through from universities and elsewhere through commercialisation.
Yeah, well, certainly a very interesting story to date, and we certainly wish you all the best for the next 10 years. Some incredibly fascinating technologies that you're trying to bring to market. So appreciate the time, Nick. It's been enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bryce. Thanks, Alec. Appreciate it.
You have been listening to an Equity Mates Media production. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice only and has not taken into account your personal financial circumstances, needs, or objectives. Before acting on general advice, you should consider if it is relevant to your needs and read the relevant product disclosure statement. And if you're unsure, please speak to a financial professional. The hosts of this podcast and their guests may have positions in the companies mentioned. Equity Mates Media operates under an Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.